Also, I would like to welcome you. I'm very happy to have you all here in this room and for this conference. So, as this is an introduction, I will begin with the question mark, because you won't be given the opportunity to ask questions after my presentation. So I'll begin with the question mark. Actually, my task here is really a humble one, to introduce into the present conference and to give some clues to the upcoming discussions. So as you see, we begin with this question mark. You may wonder who I am. So actually, I shall present myself in the briefest possible way. I'm a historian and as such research assistant in the historical analysis services of the Swiss Federal Archives. Although I have engaged in administrative history for some years now, I still consider myself a novice in this field. When we set off in the Swiss Federal Archives for our journey into the open range of administrative history, one of the first things we realized was that research in this field in Switzerland has been rather weak compared to strong traditions of administrative history research in most other European nations and, for example, the US. So, as you see, I will come by more or less these points. Some remarks to administrative history in general, then I will go to information and ICT, the working of administration, government machine, some remarks, and then I will reflect a little bit about hybridity in administrative practice. So, the Swiss Federal Archives at the beginning of our journey into the fields of administrative history. When you look upon administration, the notion of information is ubiquitous. In a sense, administration is all about information processing, gathering, storing, searching, reusing, reinterpreting and sharing information in a never-ending communication chain, or rather in an ever-expanding communication network. From the early chancellery administration based on information organized chronologically in minutes, over the modern administration with its files organized by systems of registration and reference numbers supplemented by card indices, to the present administration and the future one, using elaborate digital information management systems, integrating all this in seamlessly interconnected databases. Not only the manner how information was processed had been constantly changing, but also the form and content of the information itself. This undoubtedly has and will have far-reaching consequences that go beyond the field of administrative practice. Also, the present President of the Swiss Confederation, Simonetta Sommaruga, is well aware of this link between the way we work in the office and the way society is governed. In an interview with a renowned Swiss newspaper after her election to federal president last year, she put it in a nutshell, saying that in the past we used to send a letter, today we send an email and then a text message. This leaves marks in politics. Traduction is mine, of course. It was a German interview. From the many aspects to be considered, When dealing analytically with the social entity called administration, we were soon attracted by the question of the working of this entity's inner mechanic, referring also, of course, to these big writers of administrative history in the broadest sense. Of course, this was certainly mainly due to our odd position as administrator historians. Be it as it may, the questions of how administration works and why it works the way it does are closely linked to information processing, because this is, as already mentioned, the most important asset and product of administrative action. As administrators in the so-called information age, we are experiencing these days the transforming power of information and the rapidly developing techniques of its processing. As historians, we are intrigued by the strong and manifold interaction that has taken place and still does between information, communication, technology, and administration. And here we have arrived at the very subject of this conference, the entwined history, present and future of administrative practice and information and communication technology. In his seminal study, The Government Machine, tracing the history of the British civil service in the 19th and 20th century, John Agar has laid out the panorama. I open a bracket here. John Agar wanted actually in the beginning to participate at this conference and elaborate on the subject in person, but his academic duties connected with raising, you know that certainly, raising third-party funds for a research project prevented him to come to Bern. So there was nothing we could do about that. On its one end, Agar shows how ICT affected and changed administrative practice and organization. This is the familiar way to look at the issue today. On its other end, however, Agar looks the other way around, demonstrating how metaphorical ideas about administrative practice influenced the design of new ICTs. In this view, the conceptualization of the administration as a machine was a prerequisite of the mechanization of administrative processes, and the ideals about how proper administrative practice should work shaped the way mechanical devices were designed. So one illustrative example for this was the analytical engine, devised by the English mathematician, philosopher, inventor, mechanical engineer, and would-be politician Charles Babbage in the 1820s and 30s. The machine was to be controlled by instructions stored in the form of holes punched into cards, making obsolete direct human intervention in the operational working process. With this concept, he materialized the idea of a strict separation between thought and labor, which was actually the guiding principle of organization in the civil service at that time. Agar shows how Babbage's concept was based on the previous metaphorical construction of the administration as a machine. The focus of the next 2 days' discussion is on the development of ICT and administrative practice in the 20th century. That is, it embraces both the accelerated mechanization and the later digitization of administrative information processing. Whereas the development of mechanization has been studied intensively for a long time, the study of the causes, effects, and ways of digitization within public administration have begun only relatively recently. So, considering also the proposed presentations, we will certainly pay considerable attention to issues connected with these digital changes. and we will have the privilege to do it from an interdisciplinary perspective. Moreover, adopting a long-term perspective, the history of mechanization will probably help us to see clearer what is really new in digitization. I would like to focus on one aspect that struck me while preparing the conference. Let me present it briefly as a hypothesis. It seems that digitization introduced a new distinction within administrative practice and organization, a sort of digital divide, if you like. It constructed within administration digital and analog worlds metaphorically separated from each other. Mechanization had never led to such a separation of mechanical and non-mechanical worlds. Mechanization considered administration a unity of man and machine. Administrative processes were still thought of as made and controlled by men, partly supported by machines. The reference point remained, however, the known administrative practice, and the question was how mechanical devices could make this practice more efficient. Whereas at the beginning, digitization schemes were contrived in similar ways, they gradually began to emancipate themselves from the analog administrative processes and created their own reality. The question was now not how technology would support administrative processes, but how these processes could be replaced by digital information processing, in the end, how they could be automated. There were, however, three main obstacles on the way to full automation. Firstly, input to digital processes usually comes from men. Secondly, the output of these processes is directed towards men. And thirdly, depending on the available data and the technology, human control is necessary at certain points in the process. So administrative processes assumed a genuinely hybrid character with more or less numerous passages from digital to analog procedures. Let me just illustrate this with an example from our own practice. Just a very simple process, the ordering process for files. Not so long ago, this process was entirely analog. The client had to fill in a form and hand it in at the desk. Then an archivist would check if the file were legally accessible and confirm this with his signature on the form. The form consisted of two sheets, a control slip and a carbon copy. Accessibility confirmed, another collaborator would fetch the box containing the file in the repository and hand it over to the client. At the place of the box in the repository, he would put the carbon copy as a surrogate. The control slip would be stored in a card box in the back office of the reading room. At some time, the boxes given out by client were manually registered in a database in order to keep record of the executed orders. But this practice turned out to be too costly and was soon abandoned. Today, the client orders the files directly via the digital catalog. The order is registered within the central archival information system. But then the process becomes analog again. Data in the system are printed on an order sheet consisting of two parts, a delivery slip for the client and a surrogate for the repository. In obvious cases, the system is able to mark the form as free, so only the remaining forms have still to be signed by an archivist to confirm accessibility. So what we have here is a typically hybrid administrative process. Going back and forth between analog and digital information processing. as we have been pushing the digital frontier further, substituting digital information processing for analog sub-processes, we gained above all two benefits. All orders are now registered automatically, and we have, at no extra cost, thorough control of clients' orders at any time. At the same time, the semi-automation of the sub-process of authorizing access improves the efficiency not only of this very sub-process, but of the process as a whole. The free order sheets can be passed directly from the printer to the logistics staff, thus eliminating two process interfaces by omitting the loop passing by the archivist. Just to go back to this. So you eliminate these two interfaces at the bottom here. Of course, it is easy to think of further automation of the ordering process, and we do indeed work on it. For digital files, we have no problems to imagine a fully automated process from order to delivery without any human interference. When we look at what is passed over in these analog digital passages, we see, of course, information. But this information changes its form and character as inscription. It was Bruno Latour from whom we learned to consider the importance of these immutable mobiles, a concept he developed in his famous article on visualization and cognition, drawing things together, in order to discuss how information is passed between agents. Just to give you some examples of immutable mobiles. The concept allowed him to analyze the many tiny interferences and passages between oral and written practices. Aware of the power of this concept, he went on to connect the tiny advantages the one or the other provided in daily practice to the discussion of big questions of social power constellations. On a global scale, this linking of the tiny with the big offered a line of argument that made it possible to transcend the crude notion of the great divide between the West and the rest, in parentheses. We need not to think so far here, but if we transfer Latour's concept to the tiny interferences and passages between analog and digital practices and pay due attention to the tiny advantages they provide, we could get a clue to open up new perspectives which enable us to connect analytically the inner mechanics of administration and its outward interactions in the wider political and social context. And here we come back to our conference. Latour's concept provides an analytical bracket embracing the different contributions addressing both the tiny world of administrative practice and the broader context within which administration is always operating. It builds a bridge to go back and forth between the diverse issues addressed by our conference.